Assalamu alaikum guys, welcome to chapter 8 lessons 1 and 2. Both of them kind of relate to one another. So what we're dealing with are graphing of quadratics and the properties of quadratics. So that's why I'm combining the two lessons. So number one, I'm not really going to teach you how to graph because we've done graphing in the past. But more than anything, when you have any type of equation, whether it's linear, quadratic, or what have you, I've always told you I'll start with your input of -2 all the way to 2. So I created my table of inputs and outputs. You can create a table of inputs and outputs. Remember, use the negatives so you can know how the graph behaves on the negative side, and the positives so you know what the end product is on the positive side as well. Obviously, you have your calculator, so you can graph using your calculator, and you can also access the table to get your table of inputs and outputs. But for this purpose of this lesson, we're dealing really more with the properties, so I'm going to switch you on to this. So I went ahead and used the ordered pairs from the table that I created. The equation that I graphed is y is equal to x squared plus 2. So this is the graph. Notice that it is a U, okay? Now there's a reason why it opens up. And not only that, we're going to learn how is it that it opens up and why does it open up. It also has an axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry basically is the line that cuts the parabola of a quadratic in half. And in this case, it happens to be this red line, which is 0. It's not always 0, obviously. Depends on how the parabola is shifted left or right. So usually that, or not usually, but the axis of symmetry itself is where, if I do a vertical line test right down the middle, where does it cross my x-axis? So it's always an x value. Not only that, that lowest point right there is called a vertex. So let's deal with the properties and how an equation plays a role. So I've got two equations right here. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. And then on the bottom I have y is equal to negative ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's start with the first one. Understand that the value of a, b, and c can be any numerical value. It can also be that invisible one. So whenever you have a positive a, okay, if the leading coefficient is positive, your graph will always be an upside up U, okay? So if it's positive, graph opens up, okay? So based on the leading coefficient, if it's positive, it opens up. Now the lowest point in this case is called a vertex. A vertex is always an x and y value. It's an ordered pair. I don't know if you can see the y as well, but it's an x and y value, so it's an ordered pair. And we'll teach you how to calculate that. You're also going to learn how to calculate the axis of symmetry, which is the line right down the middle. Where would it touch the x-axis if I create a vertical line test? Not only that, since it opened up, the lowest point of the vertex is called a minimum. So another thing is that we know that it has a minimum value. And we're going to learn how to calculate the minimum value as well. Now on the other equation, it starts with a leading coefficient that's negative. So if it's negative, that means that my graph will be an upside down U. Okay? So if it's a negative, the graph opens down. Okay, it's also got a vertex. That's the vertex. And remember, vertex is always an x and y value, which is an ordered pair. We're going to learn how to get the axis of symmetry as well. And not only that, if it is that highest point, that means that this has a maximum. Okay, so now remember, you're not always going to have a graph. So how do we apply it if we're just given an equation? And that's what you're learning today. How can you figure out all the values of an equation based on just looking at an equation and then obviously formulas, okay? So let's say, for example, the first equation, y is equal to x squared minus 8x and then plus 12. So what you're going to learn is how to figure out the axis of symmetry, okay? And I'm just going to abbreviate. You're also going to learn how to figure out your vertex. you're going to decide, how does the graph open? Does it open up or down? Does it have a minimum or a maximum? And if it has a minimum or maximum, what's that value? So minimum slash max value. And then the last thing is the y-intercept. Now, some of these are really easy to do right now. First of all, it has a leading coefficient that's positive, so that therefore it's going to open up, right? So the graph opens up. Not only that, if it opens up, remember, if it opens up, that means it has the lowest value as a minimum. So we know it has a minimum. Other thing that we've learned in previous lessons is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is always the constant. So the y-intercept in this case is 12, okay? So now let's go ahead and figure out, how do we figure out axis of symmetry? That's the first thing we're gonna do. So the axis of symmetry is based on formula. So x is equal to negative b over 2a. Now remember that we have the value of a, b, and c. And you do keep track of negatives, okay? So we have negative, and my b value is negative 8 over 2 times a. A is 1, the invisible one. Double negative, negative times negative 8 is positive 8. 2 times 1 is 2. So now I know that my x value is 4. That's my axis of symmetry. So wherever this parabola is graphed, if I do a vertical line test right on the axis of symmetry, it's going to pass through 4 on the x-axis. So my axis of symmetry is 4. Now that I have my x value, I can use the equation y is equal to x squared minus 8x plus 12. And remember, if I said that x is equal to 4, all I have to do is plug in the 4 and figure out what my value of y is. So y is equal to 4 squared minus 8 times 4 plus 12. Y is equal to 16 minus 32 plus 12. And if I go ahead and plug into the calculator 16 minus 32 plus 12, it's going to give me a total of negative 4. So now I have my x value at 4, my y value at negative 4. That means my ordered pair is 4, negative 4, and that is my vertex. That's the lowest point. Now, as far as the minimum and maximum value, we know it's a minimum value based on the decision that we took. The minimum value is always that y coordinate. That's the lowest it will go, okay? So, there it is. Let's try another one. Let's try one with a leading coefficient that is negative. Now, let's say, for example, that we have y is equal to negative 3x squared, and we have plus 12x minus 7. So again, we need the axis of symmetry, we need the vertex, we need to see how it opens, and we need minimum or maximum. We need the minimum or max value, and we need the y-intercept. So first of all, what's the easy part to do? Leading coefficient is negative, so it's going to open upside down. So we know that it opens down. And if it opens down, we know the vertex it has at highest, so it has a maximum. The last thing that we can get real quick is that negative 7 is the y-intercept. And now we calculate the axis of symmetry. Remember, we said x is equal to negative b over 2a. So remember, we've got our a, b, and c. A, b, and c. So we've got negative, and our b is what? 12. And then 2 times negative 3. So I'm going to apply the negative to the 12. And then 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So I know that my x value is 2. Okay? So this is my axis of symmetry. And then all I have to do is plug it into the formula. Y is equal to negative 3x squared plus 12x minus 7. Y is equal to negative 3, and remember 2 squared, plus 12 times 2 minus 7. And do the math, guys. It's pretty easy. Just do order of operations. So negative 3 times 4 plus 24 minus 7, and then y is equal to negative 12 plus 24 minus 7. Go ahead and use your calculator. If you use your calculator, you should get that y is equal to 5. So now I've got my value of x, I got my value of y, and I create an ordered pair. So my vertex is 2, 5. Remember that I said the minimum or maximum value always comes from that y coordinate, which in this case, it's 5. Okay? So that's the gist of it, but I do have one more example because you're not always going to have A, B, or C. Mainly the B and C are in question. If you're talking about quadratic, you have to have an A. If you don't have a quadratic function, then it's most likely linear or something else. But we're talking about quadratics. So let's say that we have y is equal to 4x squared minus 2. Again, we're looking for the axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry. We need to know the vertex. We need to know how the graph opens. We need to know if it's minimum or max. We need to know if it's what the minimum or max value is. And we also need to know the y-intercept. Okay? First of all, we know it's a positive leading coefficient, so it's going to open up. So the graph is going to open up. Now, since it's going to open up, the lowest point is called the minimum. All right? Our y-intercept is negative 2. Now, go ahead, remember that we said x is equal to negative b over 2a, and that's for our axis of symmetry. This is A, this is C, there's no B. So this is what you do. When there is no B, it's okay to put a 0, guys. 2 times 4, and obviously negative, you cannot have negative 0, but it's 0 over negative 8, which is 0. So my axis of symmetry is 0. Okay? Now use the formula. Y is equal to 4x squared, and since x is 0, my axis of symmetry is 0. Go ahead and use the formula for x squared minus 2, and y is equal to 4 times 0 squared minus 2. Anything times 0 is 0, so y is equal to negative 2. So now I have my x, and I have my y, and that's my ordered pair, 0, negative 2. And then, since I said it's a minimum, the lowest point it'll go is that y, which is negative 2. And that's the gist of the lesson, guys. So I'm going to try to just give you all classwork so you can get it over and done with and you have no homework. That's what I'm going to try to do. Just one last thing that I remembered. Now, you need to know how to order quadratics from widest to narrowest. So let's say that I ask you order from widest to narrowest. And the quadratics that I'm giving you is y is equal to 4/5 x squared, y is equal to 4x squared, and then the last one is y is equal to 1/2 x squared. So these are 3 quadratics, and they want them from the from the widest to the narrowest. So how do you determine what's the widest and what's the narrowest? Rule of thumb, the lower the value, and this is before you're going to negatives, so negatives is going to be something different, and we'll discuss that later. But the lower the value between 0 and 1, the wider it is. That means it's rising at a slower rate. So the lesser of all the values, and we're talking about the a's, we got 4/5, 4, and 1/2. 1/2 is the least of all values. So that means that is going to be the widest parabola. So y is equal to 1/2 x squared. That's the first one. Then the next one is the 4/5. Y is equal to 4/5 x squared. Then the last one, y is equal to 4x squared. So the lesser the value between 0 and 1, the wider it spreads, the slower it's rising. The greater the value, the faster it's rising up. Therefore, the parabola is a lot slimmer or thinner, if you want to call it. It's not as wide. So that's the last of it. Inshallah, you'll be able to finish the classwork and you won't have any homework today. All right, guys. Meet me in class if you have questions.